The OCP Critical Facilities Operations Framework. This is a webinar about the site management process called Lifecycle and Financial Management. We will have a process overview and also look at lessons learned or customer experiences relating to this process and end up with some final notes for you to consider when working with this process. So the lifecycle and financial management process, where does this connect into the OCP framework? It's part of the delivery model and it's site management where it belongs and is one of those processes run by the site management function. As an overview, the process really focuses on three different parts. One and the first one we will talk about here is the site systems life cycle management. That means that when a critical facility is built or refurbished, or you add, move or change things there, you purchase site systems. The life cycle management, they typically rely on the vendor specifications for end of life, but end of life is not the same as the actual change out forecast for that system or component. So it's important to have the clarification of the measurements made by the vendors where they have an anticipated end of life, and they may also have another warranty timeline than the expected end of life, means that the site management function needs to be in control of what the real life change out forecast and warranty management should look like. And the aim is, of course, to control the warranty rights and the requirements so that the change out can be made as cost efficiently as possible if needed, and otherwise to operate the components and systems in an environmentally friendly way and provide such a long life cycle as possible. As an example from a customer here, it is the outsourcing of an in-house site management function. In this case, the one of the key needs for this site owner was to improve the warranty management. There was a frustration that the operating costs were higher than planned because of the vendors charging for replacement components earlier than the site owner expected. So during the outsourcing process, it was put a target of identifying how to lower the costs for these things, because the site was relatively new and there should be more warranties replacements being used rather than having to pay every time for new things. But it turned out that the root cause was not in this process. The root cause was in another process called document management. The earlier in-house function, they simply didn't have control over the asset lists with, for example, commissioning dates for the site systems. They hadn't kept copies or originals of the vendors' warranties or compliance certificates from the actual commission. And the vendor specifications for end of life were not always documented. So basically what it meant was that there was a site being up and running that had been commissioned and delivered with different warranty lengths and different warranties certificates provided, but these have been lost over time and there were no structured documentation showing when the different things had been commissioned and thereby starting to count for the warranty timelines. And since the customer wasn't able to provide this to the vendors simply said, if you can't provide us with that information, you will have to purchase new components. So this shows the importance of this part. The next area within the life cycle and financial management is the financial management itself. This is the traditional budgeting and follow-up process, which means that typically you would have a 3 to 5 year high-level financial plan for a site or a portfolio of sites, and then you would have maybe a rolling 12-month or a fiscal year detailed budget. And once you have that in place, you accrue costs, of course, internal work being produced or external suppliers providing work and sending their invoices. These costs, regardless if they are internal or external, need to be analyzed and accounted to the correct or distributed correctly between the different cost elements of the budget. And that means that you can see whether you are on budget or coming in below it or have a trend going above it, which means you provide a forecast. What will this look like for whatever time period is required? So the financial management is quite important for the site management to be having control over. And of course, this ties in with the previous topic of the site systems lifecycle management. If you're in control of your change-out forecast and know where you have warranties still remaining, that means that will affect your budgeting and your forecast for the period. One of these examples is a site management function that had made 3-year forecasts and calendar year budgets for a portfolio of multiple sites in several years, in several cities for many years. And the costs that they were handling, they were split by site system and vendor categories. So what does that mean in practice? It means, for example, it was simply called power distribution or security services, and they were shared among the sites. So this site management function, they were responsible for a number of sites across geographies, but they were considered a joint cost center regardless of which site. So it wasn't really important to the organization where the costs were. Now, the sites, they were actually sold to a new owner and they had a different cost distribution model. They didn't want to have any costs shared between the sites. Instead, they wanted them to be broken down and related not only to site system categories, for example, power distribution, but actually down to each site system for each site. So, for example, they wanted to see what is the cost for the planned preventive maintenance works for UPS 1 on site A. And of course, they wanted to see what is the budgeted preventive maintenance works cost and what is the actual preventive maintenance works cost for this UPS and UPS 2, 3, 4 and so forth. Now, this was quite a new way of counting the cost for this site management function, and they had a very hard time reorganizing the numbers. So there was a joint effort between the parties and some support by advisory consultants. What they ended up with, together with the controllers, was a cost distribution model that was a bit more balanced. So 80% of the costs, they were split by site system category as before, but split between the sites. So that means any maintenance to the power distribution of site A was one cost category. And then the remaining 20% of the costs were such costs that were accepted by the new owner as shared costs, meaning they were not really related to one single site. For example, the site management staff costs or the salary costs and all the other related personnel costs, they were considered share costs across the portfolio of sites, and that was simply distributed across the whole portfolio. The third part is the tender and selection. Well, if you have a control of your site systems and components, you have a change out forecast, you of course need to tender and buy new equipment, but you also have your service providers, and you may want to challenge them and make sure that they are really cost effective and deliver the highest quality expected, which means that you may want to run the tender and selection process for replacement of site systems or new site systems and for the services being provided. Now, it's important to consider not only the total cost of ownership, which is of course the original investment, but then also the running cost of the system or the supplier you work with. So it's important to not focus only on the total cost ownership, but also, of course, quality, reliability, and all these other things. And there may be a code of conducts, security classifications, and security clearance of individuals, and so forth. All these things need to be considered, of course, but it is an important part of the life cycle and financial management of running a critical facility. So this example is actually from a customer contract where the whole critical facility is delivered as a service. That means it's a longer than 10 years contract, and the customer pays a fixed quarterly fee which covers all site operations, all materials, all time spent, and actually any asset risks. And that means at a fixed quarterly fee, the demand organization that does not consider the critical facility to be part of their core business, they pay the fixed fee and they know that if anything breaks down, it is the supplier that is responsible to replace those assets. And of course, without any downtime or any other breaches of service levels. So the site management team but running this contract, they need to ensure, of course, their opportunities to improve margins. And what they continuously do then is to challenge their suppliers to see if they can find more cost-efficient options. And what they did after a few years was that they ran a joint project with the corporate supply chain manager, which resulted in an annual reduction of costs for technical cleaning with 12% in this contract. And the corporate supply chain manager, of course, leveraged this project and used that across the full board of sites being operated by the supplier, which made a significant profit improvement on those contracts. Now, whether that profit goes to improving the margins and the bottom line, or if those profits go to adding to other services within the contract, or using it to increase other efforts that might have been under budgeted originally, that's another matter to handle within the financial management process. So some final notes on the life cycle and financial management process. That is that change out forecast should not be confused with the vendor end of life. It's far too often that I meet individuals that say end of life when they talk about change out forecast, or believe that they have to change something just because the vendor has set this to end of life. Cost distribution models, they need to be clarified, and the cost distribution models, what was that? Well, that is when you have costs, they may be internally accrued based on work efforts or otherwise, or they may be externally invoiced, but it's costs that needs to be shared across several systems or sites, or do not exactly belong to one clean single area. On the other hand, you may have a cost distribution model that is fully built up on every cost is connected to each supplier if everything is run by external suppliers, for example, and then it doesn't really matter. Then you don't need to distribute the cost because they are distributed already among the vendors. So again, the cost distribution model, it needs to reflect what your organization has the accounting principles or accounting structures set up for to run these kind of sites. So it's a good idea to collaborate tightly with your financial controllers on this. When you select service providers and site systems, or when you tender for new ones, make sure you consider more than lowest price. It will pay off in the long run. Hoping you will join me in the other webinars regarding other processes.